Your progesterone doesn't just go from 50 right to zero. It's a slow, gradual decline, which means that when you're supporting the progesterone, there's several different phases that you can use to help as your body goes through this process.
Introducing the Perimenopause Podcast, a show dedicated to unraveling the mysteries of achieving optimal health naturally as you transition into perimenopause and menopause. Get ready to join your host, Dr. Seth Yates, an experienced naturopathic doctor, acupuncturist, and kinesiologist, as he shares his wealth of knowledge acquired from over 40,000 patient visits and 15 years in working with perimenopausal females. Welcome to the Perimenopause Podcast.
Hey, this is Doc Yates, the Perimenopause Podcast, brought to you by perimenopause.com. And today I want to talk about 5 different phases of progesterone support that you can consider as your body transitions through perimenopause. Remember that the drop in progesterone generally starts around age 30. But this drop, it's still not enough that you're really considered in perimenopause, but it means that the process has started. So there's different things that you can do to support your progesterone along the way, and I want to break that down into 5 phases right now. So the first phase, this is where you're basically supporting your progesterone with herbs only, which means we're not using any actual hormones at this point. You can still use herbs to improve how your body is utilizing progesterone, how it's detoxifying estrogens. Herbal formulas with things like Diascorea, Vitex, I3C, DIM, all built into one. This is a great way that you can help balance the hormones without taking hormones. Now, in terms of, I'm hesitant to just give like an age range because I've seen people start perimenopause in different stages. But this is something that you can start in your 30s and you can use into your early 40s. So it's kind of at the stage where, maybe you just have some changes in PMS, or there's slight changes before your cycle. Sometimes even symptoms of like estrogen dominance as your progesterone levels are starting to drop. But it hasn't really gotten to any of the bigger effects. Like it's not really affecting you other than just a little bit during PMS. It's not affecting your sleep. It's all, and you still have very regular cycles. Now, phase 2, on the other hand, this is where you start giving progesterone in the second half of your cycle. So the second half of your cycle is called the luteal phase. So it starts after you ovulate. So there's your follicular phase. So it's like the start of your period until your period's done and until you ovulate, your follicular phase. Then you have ovulation, and then you have the luteal phase. And this phase continues until you start your period again. You're basically, if you have a regular 28-day cycle, you're looking at generally 2 weeks of the follicular phase, ovulation day, and then 2 weeks of the luteal phase. So the next phase, the second phase of progesterone support, is where you're using a little bit of progesterone only during the luteal phase. And the reason is that what should be happening, that during this phase, is your progesterone levels should be going up, and then they should be holding for a period of time, and then they'll drop off right before your period. And what I typically find during this phase is that progesterone levels still go up, but then they just don't seem to hold, and they drop off early. And when that happens, you start to see more symptoms develop. For instance, the periods will start getting different. The PMS and mood changes before will start getting different. Sleep changes before your cycle will start getting different. Sometimes the cycle and period can start getting heavier. These are all signs that the progesterone is dropping off too early, and that by using a little progesterone during this phase, you can help support that and treat those symptoms. Now, the next phase is where you're not getting symptoms just during your luteal phase. You're starting to get symptoms after your period. You're starting to get more symptoms around ovulation. And then what I have clients do during this phase, a lot of the times the way I prescribe progesterone, to keep it simple, is that a dose, it comes in a cream, and we use these little clicker tubes. Some pharmacies will use these pumps, but I will design it so that 2 clicks, or some pharmacies will use 2 pumps, is a dose. So what you'd be doing during the third phase is where you're taking your regular full dose during your luteal phase, so after ovulation. Typically people start that around day 14. But now in the first half of your cycle, you're going to be taking a half dose of progesterone, because you should still have some progesterone going on during that phase. It's not bottomed out 0, but for a lot of people it's getting too low, and they start getting symptoms after their period, or ovulation symptoms are getting worse, and they're starting to they never even used to notice ovulation, and now they do, or mood changes after their period as well. We use a low dose progesterone, so you use 1 click or 1 pump in the first half of your cycle, 2 clicks during the second. Now, even with this, generally speaking, during your period, you don't have to take anything. So you don't take anything during your period. So when your period's done, you take a half dose. Once you ovulate, you take the full dose, and then you maintain the full dose until your period starts, and then you take a break from it again. The next step is where it's full dose progesterone all the time. This is when you start seeing people when their cycle is becoming a lot more irregular. So an example would be like you don't get your period. So it's not that you're in menopause, because you have to be without your period for a year, but say you start skipping periods, things are shifting that way. That's where you're using a full dose of progesterone all the time, but then you just stop it when you get your period. So it's full dose all the time, stop when you get your period. This is when at that point you are very close to being menopausal. You're not menopausal yet by the black and white standards of the book, but you are really close. Because then the next step is generally when your period stops completely, and at that point we're no longer dealing with just progesterone. Chances are your estrogen levels have now dropped, and we are also going to be checking and adding estrogen. Now, estrogen can be added in phases too. That'll be for a different podcast. But let's go through the four phases of progesterone only. So you've got the herbal phase first, just to support your hormones. Then you have progesterone just during the second half of your cycle. Then you've got progesterone in the second half of your cycle with a half dose during the first half of your cycle. Still no hormones during your period. And then on the fourth phase, you have the full dose of progesterone, and you stop during your period, though your period's becoming more irregular at this time. Progesterone is not going to make you all of a sudden just completely get continuous cycles again. I guess if you were to dose it really high, you can manipulate it enough that you do, but I like to use low dosing, so we don't do that. But it is enough that you won't be getting any of the negative side effects and symptoms as your body's transitioning into menopause. So those are the 4 phases of progesterone support to be used as your body is transitioning through perimenopause. And again, you can start the herbs from age 30. So it's a long transition, and you might as well support it the whole way, because the more support that you do and the earlier you start, the easier that transition is going to be. It's a lot easier to transition smoothly like that, as opposed to be like, I'm not doing anything until I'm in full menopause and the hot flashes are brutal and the night sweats are awful, and at that point, who knows, it's already had some effect on your bones. Don't wait until that point. Start early, start low, go slow, but that way you're always on top of it. I hope this was helpful. This is Doc Yates signing off.
Thank you for tuning in to the Perimenopause podcast. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and visit perimenopause.com for more valuable information on how you can thrive during your transition through perimenopause. Join our community of like-minded women who are dedicated to achieving optimal health naturally, and stay up to date with the latest tips, tricks, and advice from Dr. Seth Yates. And we'll catch you on the next episode of the Perimenopause podcast.